I'm your host today, David Goldwich, and these are a few of the other courses I teach with Aventus. We did a short preview this morning for the High Impact Manager, and some of you are on that. Tomorrow afternoon, or actually I think tomorrow morning at 10:30, we've got a preview for impromptu speaking. So let me just share a little bit about that in case you're thinking about joining us for that. That's a course for when you have to speak in a meeting or to a group without preparation, without slides. I think most people, even if you don't like giving a presentation, you're okay giving one because you've got your slide deck and you're prepared and you're supposedly the expert, hopefully. But when you get to the Q&A, or on those occasions where they ask you to say a few words and you weren't expecting to, then people start to panic because they're not sure what to say. And more importantly, they feel that if they say something wrong, they may be looked at in an unfavorable way. So they're afraid of being judged, probably more than just afraid of speaking to a group. So in that class, we learned some strategies for dealing with the jitters and also a lot of templates to help guide you through the process. And tomorrow we'll look at one of those templates and you'll have a chance to put it to practice. Another course I teach a lot is Negotiate Like a Lawyer. In the US, I was a lawyer and technically still am. I've written a couple of books on negotiation. The latest one should be out next month. And I've been living in Singapore for a little over 20 years now. So I'm familiar with the culture, I know the language, I know the food. I don't speak Singlish because it just doesn't look right coming out of my face. But if you're talking Singlish, I can understand you. So be careful. Another course I teach is Confidence and Assertiveness. A lot of people, even those on the management track, go to a lot of courses, they read a lot of books, they learn a lot of soft skills. But if you don't have assertiveness and don't develop it, you're really not going to get very far. Fortunately, that's something we can help you with. Assertiveness is really just a set of skills that you can learn pretty easily. Confidence is the foundation for assertiveness. If you don't feel confident, you probably won't do that well asserting yourself. So we cover both of those. So that's me as a lad. And God, I was a good-looking guy when I had hair. Can see a similarity to this distinguished gentleman, right? Something about the crazy hair, the tongue, whatever. That's my good friend Al, and we still hang out sometimes. He's a good guy. So today, the leader is storyteller. Let me ask you guys, first of all, how many of you consider yourself to be a leader in some capacity? Either a leader at work, maybe a leader in your social groups, could be a leader in your church or some other religious or civic group, could be in the family, could be informal. You don't have to be a boss to be a leader. So if you're not thinking, yes, that's me, you really need to start thinking in a little broader way, because all of us in some capacity do lead. And one of the stories, or one of the tools that the leader has available is the use of stories. And there's quite a few different ways a leader can use that, primarily to introduce themselves. Because as leaders, you meet new people all the time, and people wonder, who is this person? What are they all about? What do they stand for? And things like that. So all of us meet people, and if you have a story, you can position yourself the way you want to be perceived. And we'll spend a little bit of time on that particular story and give some examples and hear from a few of you, stories about who you are, what you stand for. Some of the other stories that leaders tell are sales stories. A good salesman has stories that he shares. And everybody in business is in sales. You may not like sales, you may not consider yourself a salesperson, but whether you're selling yourself, selling the company, selling ideas, you're doing sales. Every company has a lot of values, you know, your core values that you see on the wall somewhere or on the website. And those values can be expressed through stories. We talked a little bit about coaching this morning, and a leader wears the role or the hat of a coach sometimes. So when you're coaching or teaching or sharing knowledge with somebody you work with, stories are a great way to use that, just like when you're talking to your own children, and a number of other purposes. So we'll look at a few of those today and cover all the rest in the full course. So one of the reasons we use stories is because when you usually communicate in business, you use a lot of data, a lot of numbers, graphs, charts, all the boring stuff you see in your presentations. And that's kind of hard to remember. Data doesn't really resonate with us very well. But if you can wrap that into a story, then you're talking, because stories also have information and data, but they also add another layer of emotion on top. And emotion is what makes the story interesting, makes it memorable. That's how you get through to people. And in business, there are a number of big companies you know very well, that have great stories, and you've probably heard some of them. For example, you may have heard about the guy who was a salesman for a milkshake company. He sold the machines that made the milkshakes, and he found a little hamburger stand in California. He bought it, and it became McDonald's. Actually, it was McDonald's, but it was just one little store. Now it's everywhere. Starbucks has the same story, except instead of milkshake machines, Howard Schultz was selling coffee machines, and bought a little cafe in Seattle, made thousands more of them, and that's his story. You may have heard the story of the old retired man selling his recipe for fried chicken door to door until somebody bought it, and that became KFC. You probably know the story of the two guys tinkering with electronics in their garage. You see, if Singapore wants to get serious about entrepreneurship, forget the void deck. People need a garage. That's where you start your business. So what story is that? The two guys in the garage. Well, that's a lot of them. It's Hewlett-Packard, it's Microsoft, it's Apple, and probably half of the other companies in Silicon Valley. Here's a story. This is the Nike story. And this is a story you all know. It's not the story of how they were founded, it's the story of their brand. And to prove that you know it, because a lot of you are thinking, I don't think I know that one. You do. And to prove it, I'm going to give you a little quiz, and you can just type the answer in the chat. So I'll give you three choices. You can choose any one of these three. Number one, Nike story is all about winning. You have to win, win, win no matter what. Or do you think the Nike story is number two? It doesn't matter if you win or lose. It's all about enjoying the fun and camaraderie of the sport? Or is the Nike story 3? You wake up early in the morning. It's cold, it's dark, it's raining. Your warm, cozy bed is calling to you, but you lace up your shoes and you go for a run, just you and the open road, pushing yourself to be the best you can be. So what do you think? Is it A, B, or C, or 1, 2, or 3? I'm seeing a lot of people say 3. Everybody's saying 3. Nobody says 1. Is the Nike story about winning? They don't talk about winning. Some people, a couple people said 2, about enjoying the sport. If you've seen the ads for Nike, nobody's enjoying themselves. They're sweating, they're in pain, they're pushing themselves physically beyond the limits. It doesn't look like they're having fun. It's more about no pain, no gain. But it looks like we've got 100 people in the room now. Not everybody voted, but almost everybody said 3. And that's the story. How is it that we all know that story? Well, Nike has spent billions of dollars and a lot of effort in their branding and advertising. And everybody knows, as soon as you see that little swoosh thing that looks like a rounded tick mark, as soon as you see that, you automatically think Nike. You don't even have to see the words. And as soon as you think Nike, you think just do it. A few of you put that for your answer. It's about pushing yourself to be your best. And if you studied psychology, you may remember Maslow's hierarchy. And the top of that pyramid, the highest aspiration we have as a species, is to be our best and to be fulfilled and self-actualized, which is really what Nike is tapping into. And because we all have that need in us, most of us, they know how to tap into that to sell their story and their shoes. And they've been very successful with that. Now, what about you guys? Do you have a story like the Nike story about your company? Or if you work for the government, about your ministry or department? I would bet you do. I think every organization does. People don't always know what their story is. Or maybe they think, well, I've got a few stories I could tell, but I'm not sure which one I should tell. And then if you're a rank and file employee, you may think, well, it isn't really up to me to tell a story. I'm not in charge of branding. I'm not the marketing person. But even within your team or department, you still have a chance to tell stories. And certainly when you meet customers, if you speak with people in the public, you'll have a chance to tell stories there as well. So the story has the emotion, the human element, something that the raw data doesn't have. And that's why I remember it so well. Another thing about stories is when you look at a presentation and you're hearing all the projections and the financials, you tend to be very skeptical because in business, that's your job. They pay you to be skeptical. You can't just believe everything everybody tells you, right? They're all looking for something. They all have an agenda. So how do you protect against that? By being skeptical. And that's the way it is in business. But when you listen to a story, your mind behaves in a very different way. You're not in critical mode. You're not looking for flaws. You're not trying to shoot them down. Instead, you're suspending disbelief and you're accepting. Now, wouldn't it be great in business if you could put everybody into a state of mind where they just accept what you say? I mean, we all wish we could do that. It's almost like magic. And a story is the way to do that. It's the way you can get people to be less critical and more accepting. And if the story sounds true and it's believable, then the message gets through and they accept what you're saying. Usually in business, everything is black or white, right? It's either right or wrong, profit or loss, stop or go, do it or don't do it. Pretty clear choice. But in the real world, we see that most things are not black or white. They're really many different shades of gray. And so a story can capture the different shades of gray. For example, here's a story you've probably heard, the story of Robin Hood. I think you're all familiar with that. Robin Hood, according to the English legend, was, well, what was he? Was he a robber, a villain, a hero? Depends. He would steal from the rich, who were very ruthless and oppressive, and give to the poor, who a lot of times had been mistreated and cheated. So some people see him as a hero because he was fighting wrongs and trying to right injustices, whereas other people see him as a villain because it doesn't matter, rich or poor, if you steal, you steal. It's against the law, it's wrong, you shouldn't do it. So is he the good guy or the bad guy? Well, he's kind of both, and he can be both at the same time, because in a story you can do that. You don't have to pick one like you do in business. So it's more of an Eastern concept, this idea that you can have two opposites forming an integral whole and a harmonious whole. Whereas the Western mindset is more either or, either right or wrong. So there's a cultural element to stories, but every culture has a lot of stories, including a lot of the same stories, as we'll see in a minute. Story helps you remember things. I mean, you can remember stuff easily if you hear it in a story, but you can't remember everything you heard in a presentation. It's a much harder sell when you're dealing with data, or you're dealing with a lot of numbers or information. So ask yourself, how can I put this into a story? How can I make the numbers or express the numbers in a way that makes it user-friendly and memorable? And then the story tells you why. Why is the first question. If you have kids, you hear it all the time, right? Kids are always asking why this, why that? And people, as civilizations, especially the young civilizations, also ask why. So if you study the ancient peoples, every single culture had a story that explained why the sun rises in the morning and sets in the evening, and the next day again and again, why the moon gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and then it gets smaller and smaller and smaller. Why does this thing happen? And they didn't really understand science, so they came up with stories about golden chariots and gods and supernatural beings. And they used that to explain how the world worked. So every culture, every civilization has a creation story. Where did man come from? How did we get here? What is our purpose? So the story explains why. As a parent, we use stories to teach our children. In school, the teacher uses stories. So why do we stop doing this in business? Why is it that when we get to a certain point, we think, you know what? It doesn't really make sense. I'm a businessman. I wear a suit. I'm professional. I'm serious. I've got responsibilities. I can't be telling these childish stories all the time. It's just not me. But then you think about, what is it that a story can do? A story can do so many things. It evokes emotions, right? Mostly these are emotions, and all of these can be evoked from a story. It doesn't mean there's no logic there. It just means that it's the emotion that drives it. So why don't we use more stories in business? I think there's a variety of reasons. One, I just said, I'm professional. It's too childish for me. It's corny. It's not the kind of reputation I want. Another reason we don't tell more stories is we may think people won't accept it. They will judge us negatively. Another reason is we think maybe I can't tell the story very well. I'm not a storyteller. Just like a lot of people think I really can't tell a joke. Every time I tell a joke, I mess up the punchline, I forget something, I leave something out of sequence. I just ruin every joke I tell. I'm not going to tell jokes. And some people feel the same way about a story. I'm not a good storyteller. I'll just embarrass myself. Better don't. All right, so I use a little Singlish. But you can learn some techniques. And in the full class, we study some of the techniques of storytelling, how to use voices and animation and develop characters and build suspense and use humor and things like that. So we learn the techniques. So that won't be an excuse anymore. And then the last reason why we may not tell stories, I mentioned before that stories evoke emotions. And sometimes when you tell a story, you're afraid, especially now with all of this racism going on, we hear a lot of people telling their own stories, their own experiences. And sometimes it's not an easy thing to do. And they get very emotional. And you may not want to be emotional or lose control in a business situation. So you may think, well, let me just stick with the serious dialogue and not tell the stories, which is unfortunate because we see that stories are very powerful. In fact, here's a little quiz for you. You can get back on the chat. And I want you to take a guess. Who do you think is the most influential storyteller of all time? The one person who used stories to affect the lives of more people than anybody else. Trump. All right, that's a little sensitive. Walt Disney. Okay, I like that. I like Walt Disney. That's a good answer. He did tell a lot of stories. And not just him, but his company now. I see a vote for Jesus. I see Obama. Okay. Abdul Kalam, not familiar. George Lucas. Richard Benson, or is that Branson? Lee Kuan Yew. Okay. I think like most good politicians, he was a storyteller. In fact, probably, at least in the American experience, Abraham Lincoln was a renowned storyteller and always had exactly the right story to tell. But I think given this little red dot syndrome, I don't know if he had the reach or the bandwidth. Steve Jobs. All right, Jack Ma, he's got a bigger audience than Steve Jobs, although I guess Steve is more global. All right, I'm seeing a lot of votes for Jesus. And, without getting religious, I think that would have to be the winner. Because if you think about the 2,000 years since he lived, and the New Testament is really just a bunch of stories that Jesus told. That's mostly what's in there. All kinds of stories about so many different things. And when you think about all of the people in those 2,000 years who are familiar with the stories, even if you're not a Christian, you've heard the stories, you've been influenced by them. Walt Disney, Steve Jobs, they've got a big audience now, but they had an almost 2,000 year late start. So I would think Jesus is probably the most influential storyteller of all time. And he's been very effective with that. Now, in modern times, you take a guy like Warren Buffett, who is the consummate businessman. Warren Buffett, the investor extraordinaire. He writes a letter to the shareholders every year as part of his annual report. And usually he tells a couple of stories in there. Stories from his life, stories about business, or even parables. And businessmen all over the world look forward to reading that letter and learning Uncle Warren's wisdom. And they will even auction off a lunch with him every year. He does it for charity. People pay millions of dollars just to sit with him at lunch for a few hours and hear his stories and wisdom. So if you've got a serious businessman like Warren Buffett who's telling stories and the business world loves him for it, then maybe you need to rethink this idea and start thinking, how can I use stories in my business or in my company with my customers? Because if it works for Jesus and Walt Disney and Steve Jobs and Warren Buffett, maybe this can work for me. Okay, so again, in terms of some of the fears, the techniques we cover in the course, and also we give you some templates so that, basically how to tell a story for your vision, how to tell a value story, how to introduce yourself. In fact, that's what we're going to focus on for this session. We can't cover everything, but we can look at the who I am story, the story you tell when you meet new people. Now let's imagine you're a teacher. Okay, some of you may actually be teachers, but you've all been to school. And what is it? Every year on the first day of school, what are all the students wondering about their new teacher? Anybody want to put an answer in the chat? Your first day of school, your new teacher introduces herself. Hello, I'm Madam Tan. I'll be your teacher this year. And the students are thinking what? Well, I know what you're thinking because I've asked this question many times. And you guys think the same thing we were wondering in America when we had our new teacher. We're thinking, is she nice or is she fierce? Isn't that really what you want to know? Because if she's nice, we're going to have a great year and we could probably take advantage, right? But if she's fierce, then we can't take advantage, but it's not going to be fun. So Mrs. Tan is in a dilemma. She needs to position herself in a way that's going to serve her purposes. So what does she do? She could say, I'm Mrs. Tan, I'm your teacher, and I'm very nice, and I love all my students, and we're going to have so much fun together. And the kids are thinking, all right, she's a pushover. we're going to be able to take advantage and do all sorts of things and get away with things, and it's going to be a great year for us. Of course, Madame Tan or Mrs. Tan doesn't want that. So her other choice, she could say, Mrs. Tan, and I've been teaching for 30 years, and I know every trick in the book. I've seen all kinds of kids. You're not going to fool me. There's nothing you can do that will surprise me. I'm going to rule this classroom with an iron fist. So don't try anything. And then the kids are all demoralized and they're thinking, oh no, this is not going to be pleasant. Not only won't we get away with things, but we're not going to have any fun. And she doesn't seem very nice. And it's all right. So either way, it's a problem for her. How does she want to be perceived? What do you think would be the ideal perception for her to create? What does she want the students to think of when they get to know her? Okay, so somebody suggests, tell a story. Firm but approachable. Okay, I like that. Firm but approachable. That's really both at the same time, right? It's not black and white like we said before. It doesn't have to be firm only or approachable only. It could be some sort of combination, a shade of gray. And the way to do that is with a story. So she might tell a story about how she had a student with an issue, maybe a problem with the administration, and how she supported him, stood behind him, fought for him because it was the right thing to do. And now the students are thinking, yeah, that's cool because, you know, she's tough and she'll fight for me, but she's tough and I can't get away with things. She's fair, but I can't take advantage. So by telling that story, she can have the best of both worlds. Now notice, she has to tell it as a story. She cannot say, I'm Mrs. Tan and I am firm but fair and approachable. I want you to know that. Because the students are thinking, no, she isn't. She can't be both. She's just saying that. That's what she wants us to think. But when she tells the story, she doesn't actually say that herself. The story says that. She's just telling the story, and the children conclude on their own, oh, I see. She's firm and tough, but she's also nice, and she'll take my side if it's the right thing to do. And they figure that out by themselves. And when people figure it out for themselves, it becomes real. If you're telling them it's because it's a lecture and because you've got an agenda, and they don't trust that. So that's how Mrs. Tan, the teacher, might introduce herself. What about the rest of you? You guys meet people. If you're in sales, you're meeting new prospects and seeing old customers all the time. If you're especially in an outward-facing role like public relations or corporate comms, you're dealing with the public, with stakeholders, perhaps with the media, who are going to pick up and amplify the story. It becomes very important. Obviously, all the senior people meet a lot of people at all levels all the time. But even if you're fairly internal and you just have a few people on your team, you still have a chance to use these stories. Certainly on, if you're new in the workplace or new in the role or new in that organization, people are wondering, who is this person? So how can you introduce yourself in a way that's memorable and positions yourself the way you want to be perceived? So I've got a story I share because, as I said, I've been here 20 years. And when I first arrived here, And I would tell people that I was a lawyer in the US, and now I'm a trainer or a speaker, or for a couple of years I was a lecturer. Um, People were wondering, why did he do that? I mean, it doesn't make sense. If you're a lawyer, why would you give that up? The high pay, high power, high prestige that comes with law to be a trainer or a teacher. It doesn't make sense to me. Now, not everybody asked that question, but enough people did to make me think, everybody's wondering about this. And they're not just curious, because that's what I thought at first. I realized they're suspicious because it doesn't make sense, and they're trying to think maybe he's hiding something, maybe he got disbarred, maybe he wasn't a good lawyer, maybe that's why he came halfway around the world to Singapore and changed jobs so they can't find him and put him in jail. They were suspicious of me. So how do I address that? Because that's just a natural thought that occurs to these people, but it still needs to be addressed. So the first thing I could do was nothing and think, maybe this person won't think that. I hope they don't think about that. But if I know a lot of other people have thought that, then I have to assume other people will too. Maybe they're too polite not to say anything, but they're all wondering that in the back of their mind. So I cannot afford to do nothing. The second thing I could do is to just explain logically. I was a lawyer for many years. I got tired of it. I wanted to try something new. I didn't get disbarred or anything. I just wanted to try something else. And they may think, well, that's what he wants me to think. I think he's pretty sensitive about this. Why is he even saying anything? I think he really did get disbarred. So saying something in a self-serving way doesn't help me. So the third thing I can do is tell the story. And I've been using the story for quite a long time. There's other stories I might tell. Maybe there's a better one, but so far, this is the best story I've had, the one that does what I want it to do. So I'll share that with you now, give you a little bit of an example of how you can take a story, not make something up, but just take an actual story that happened to you and craft it as a story so that it does what you want it to do. It positions you the way you want your audience to perceive you. Because even if I don't do anything and people are wondering about me, maybe he got disbarred, maybe he's not trustworthy, over time, when they get to know me, they'll make their inferences, but that could take a long time. That could take months or years. And some meetings, for example, in sales, you may only get one chance. So you can't depend on letting them get to know you to sell yourself. You have to do it as soon as you meet them with your story about who you are. So here's my story. As I said, I was a lawyer in the US. And one day I'm in my office and a young man comes into me and he says, "David, I'd like you to sue my parents." And I thought, wow, that sounds kind of extreme, suing your parents. I know in Asia you can't do that. In Singapore, your parents can sue you if you don't take care of them. But even in America, people don't go around suing their parents. So I thought that's a pretty extreme request. And so I said to him, Ed, his name was Ed, "Ed, why do you want me to sue your parents?" "Well, my grandfather died a couple years ago. He left me a lot of money. My parents are administering the estate and they won't give me a cent. And the only way I'm going to get my own money is if I sue them." And I thought, all right, maybe he's got a case, but still, it doesn't seem like the best way to go about it. So I called his father, who was a businessman, and I said, "Mr. Cooper, your son was in my office this morning. He's concerned about the way you and your wife are administering his late grandfather's estate. Is there anything you'd like to share with me? And the father said, David, let me tell you something about my boy Eddie. Eddie is a remarkable judge of character. He could read you like a book. He knows exactly what buttons to push to get what he wants. But do you know he's got a learning disability? No, I didn't know that. He didn't mention that. He can't hold a job. He can't make decisions. He can barely take care of himself, and he certainly can't manage his money. And if you're anything like his other lawyers, you're going to disappear just as soon as you use up that retainer he gave you. And I thought, wow, this guy seems to know a lot about what's going on. And it seems like it's happened before. So I thought, all right, there's stuff to this that I don't know. So I invited the parents into the office and Ed, and we talked for about an hour. And then the next week we met again. About 5 or 6 weeks went by and we'd meet for an hour and talk. And at the end of this period, things were a lot better. It wasn't 100% better, but a lot better. Ed was going back to his parents' house once a week for dinner, just like in the good old days. There were some tears, some group hugs, and I felt pretty good that I had been able to help this dysfunctional family get closer together and solve a lot of their problems. And so I started thinking, what am I doing? Almost any other lawyer would have just sued the parents. Right? I mean, if that's what your client wants, if he gives you a check and he says, this is what I want, I'm hiring you to do this, who am I to argue? I mean, he's allowed to do it. Somebody's going to do it. But I didn't feel comfortable with that. And then I thought a little more, and I realized the Florida bar gave me a license to practice law. I was a legal counselor, not a family counselor. They don't want me helping families. They want me suing people and drafting contracts and filing zoning applications and doing other lawyerly deeds. And so I thought there must be a better way for me to use my talents and time to help people instead of intimidating them and breaking up families and making a mess. So I started teaching, training, speaking, and for 25 years, that's what I've been doing. Haven't looked back, no regrets. So that's my story. So remember, when I first met people, they're thinking, I wonder if he got this far, this is very fishy, something's wrong here. After I tell them the story, what do you think they're thinking now? They're thinking, wow, he sounds like he really cares. He wants to help people. I think he's too nice to be a lawyer. All right? Now that's what I want them to think. But I can't tell them to think that. I can only share a story and let them come to that conclusion themselves. And so when I tell that story, I'm positioning myself. I'm saying, this is how I want you to perceive me, but I'm not telling them what to think. I'm just setting it up so it happens. Okay? So that's kind of magical. So that's what I've used. And we saw Mrs. Tan, the teacher, she could also use a story to position herself in a way where the students will perceive her according to her wishes and not leave it up to chance. You're taking control of the situation. Okay? So I'm wondering, is there anybody out there brave enough to share a story that they might tell people when they first meet them? A positioning story like this. I'm not sure there is, but there's 97 people out there. And if anybody wants to take a try, you can just let me know in the chat, and then you can unmute your mic and tell us a story. Actually, when I look at the photo gallery, I see a bunch of black squares. People are very shy. So I'm not sure somebody, Edwina, how are you? A real person. And Vivian. All right, so there's a few of you out there who are real people and not just black squares. All right, any takers? I want to try. Somebody, who is this brave soul? John Huang Chen.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Where are you? I don't see you now.
I'm here, no?
Okay, I see you. No. All right, I'll find you. Oh, okay, there you are.
Ah.
I see you. So what do you do?
Oh, actually, I do travel agent last time.
Okay.
But
Well, your
now
business must be slow.
my business is tourism, travel agent, tourism. But recently, I actually can. But but now tourism, of course, not so good. I have a small like a homestay, and then actually recently I'm trying to do a video profile for myself, but I don't know what to say, so that's why I try this one. So yeah, and
so you're getting free consulting here.
Sorry?
You're getting some free consulting here.
Yes, and now I do want to try. Actually, I do try a few days videoing myself, recording myself, but I look at my talking. It's so funny. I don't understand myself why I'm talking this way also, because I'm jumping the topic and then it's too long. The video is maybe only 3 minutes. I become 6 minutes. I haven't finished my talk, and then not clear. Not clear. I just want to have a video profile for myself, what I'm doing, okay? I should like this story. I also, is it because I do like a homestay for female, okay?
Right.
For female, just kind of small hostel. And when you're talking about the story, I realize actually, why I do that because I from travel agent, I still doing my travel agent, but now because just temporarily stop for a while, just still doing just need to waiting for the border to open. Yeah, but I want to have that's why I want to because I doing like who I am. I'm Jessie from original from China, but live here 20 years, similar to you. But I want to I create a homestay for female because I'm female also. I do I feel that I also can. Of course I'm older. I can do something with for helping for younger girls who just got in Singapore here. They are study. They have they have my first. This is my true story. Actually, I just don't know how to tell this story correctly. So it's like that. Actually, I had last time I have my the Mongolian girl. She's student just got here because Mongolian is maybe currency very low, and then in Singapore maybe currency is big. She's tempted. Trying during the study, thinking, "Oh, want to make this money, want to make that money." Thinking too much. But one day she asking me she met the guy in the bar or something, asked her to go to the or pay for her to Bali or something. Then she's thinking this question, for a few days and asking me. I said, "Oh, really? You asking me? When I'm 19, I'm poor, but I'm happy, You are meeting someone. No one offered me to go to free ticket to Bali, but you have. Why you are still here?" She said, "Because you want to listen my suggestion. When I was young, I'm 19, I'm poor, I'm happy, I'm study, I'm okay. If I have poor boyfriend, I go with, then that's different story. But someone give me so much, and then it doesn't make sense for me. I don't need. For me, I don't need." So, but she took my suggestion, She really didn't go, and then she start doing like a hard job. I say, you really want to make money, you can go to like do waitress or something, you know, even cleaning also. Let's say, I just say, still be something the job when I was young. Unless only you can do, right? So that's
Okay.
what my thinking. So, hey, but she changed, you know. So after that, okay, now she go back for a long time. But I feel so good, you know, like about myself. Or maybe I'm boasting, but I do feel good about like I can educating for younger people, or what can I do? I only can influence people around me, right? So
Right.
yeah. So and then they become another, maybe become another tough lady like me, but I feel good. But you know, of course, I'm also learning, you know. So you
Okay.
see, when I'm talking, when that's the way, the reason why I do like enjoying that. I can do something or what I have learned, or I can share
Right.
what my like
Okay.
passion about, or I feel good. I just feel good about that. So
Okay. I
yeah,
see where
I
you're
feel
coming
good
from.
on that. Yeah.
So this is a story you use to promote your homestay service.
Yes, yes.
Um, so the general idea is people are wondering, why should I stay there, right? Why should I support her hostel or whatever it is?
Yes.
Uh, and the reason you're telling me is because you like meeting people and advising them, and when you were young, you were
Yeah.
also
A bit
confused,
true that also. Yeah.
and so you want to be like a big sister
Yes,
uh,
yes,
to these girls.
yes.
And okay, so now you're not a hotel. I mean, a hotel, they say we've got a pool, we've got a restaurant, we've got this and that.
No, I
And what
don't
you're
have.
saying
I wish.
is, the reason I'm doing this is to help young girls who are traveling, because, that's what I experienced, and I know what it's like, how it's confusing and maybe dangerous. And when people hear that story, they're likely to say, all right, now I know who she is and what she's doing. That sounds like something I want to support. That's something that I would be comfortable with, instead of just a place that, it's got a nice view, it's got a laundry machine or whatever.
Oh, yes,
So,
yes.
and in fact, today, especially like you with little solopreneurs and online businesses, a lot of the social media is to tell your story,
Mm.
so that, people, because you don't have an advertising budget. So let me give you a little bit of advice. We don't have time to write the whole story, but I'm using this as an example for everybody else here to see how this works. So you've identified, this is my market, this is what I'm doing, how do I make myself different? And really, you answered the question, why? Remember that question, why is she doing this? And the answer is a good answer. If you said, I'm opening this hostel because I want to make money, people are not going to like that. It's not going to work very well. So where to go from here? You've identified kind of the story you want to tell. Usually you've got about 30 to 45 seconds to tell the
Yes.
story when you meet people. If you're doing a video, you might have 2 or 3 minutes. You may not want to use that much time because people don't listen for very long. They're jumping around, clicking on the next link. So you need to have a very short and sweet story. And the problem most people have when they're crafting the story is it goes too long.
Yeah.
So what I suggest is you tell the story and you record it. Maybe you have a software that will transcribe the story and write it out for you. But you don't write it, you don't type it, you tell it, because you speak differently from the way you write. So you want to tell it naturally, but then when you print it out, you see how many words. Maybe it's 620 words. So then you ask yourself, can I cut it in half? Can I get it down to maybe 300 words? And you might tell a few friends the story and get feedback from them. And probably you'll notice that some of the things you say are not relevant or helpful. Some of them are repetitive. Some of them, they're just too wordy. You can reduce it to a simpler way of expression. And then your story gets better and shorter. And then you try that out. You try out the second version and get some more feedback. And you might be able to tighten up a little bit, but I mean, you could keep perfecting it and it will never be done. Most of the improvement comes between the first and the second round, okay? And maybe a third round, depending on, you know, how much work it needs. But that's the basic approach. So you identify, how do I want to position myself? And this is something, remember Mrs. Tan, she wanted to position herself as firm but approachable and fair. So what you're saying, if I understand you correctly, is, you know, I'm a trusted advisor. I've done it. I can be trusted. I want to, you know, help young girls who are in a strange land, just like somebody helped me. All right, so that's the essence. Then, I mean, you can't just say that. You have to have a story that says that. So you identify the one or two qualities that you want your story to convey and find a story that does that. And then the polishing and perfecting.
Okay.
I thank you for being brave.
Mm.
And if you come to the class, then, you know, certainly we'll have more time and you'll get to share your story with a group of other participants who can give you more personal feedback. But to move on, you may want to tailor your stories to different audiences or platforms. So JC, using you as the example, if you're face-to-face with another person you meet, you probably have 30 seconds. If you're doing a video for YouTube, probably 2 minutes. If you're using social media like Instagram or Facebook, probably you need a different format. Might be a written format, could be a shorter video. So you need to tailor it and to different audiences. So your audience is pretty targeted already. You know, just young single girls, probably students traveling overseas by themselves for the first time. But if you're in sales, you may have different types of customers. You may have a story for a sales customer, a story for a colleague internally, and maybe socially, you may want to tell a different story when you meet people socially who maybe have different interests or reasons for wanting to get to know you socially compared with business. So you want to tailor the story to the audience and to the medium or channel or platform and to the effect that you want to get. Remember, this is about positioning yourself. And in so doing, you may have different ways you want to be perceived by different people or in different situations. So if you're looking for a job, probably you want to be seen as competent, trustworthy, team player, things like that, hardworking. If you're, I don't know, maybe speed dating, okay? You've got a bunch of people you're going to meet and you only have a couple minutes with each one. You probably don't care if they think you're hardworking and professional. Maybe you want to be fun and adventurous or something else, whatever it is. So tailoring your message depending on the time and the place and mostly the audience. and maybe the different sides of your personality that you want to highlight. Okay. So any questions on any of this so far? This is just some information about Eventus. While you guys are typing in or thinking of your questions, let me just cover this. So Eventus, I've been working with them for over 10 years, pretty much since they started. And I showed you some of the courses I teach. In the real world, they meet at the Concord Hotel on Orchard Road. They've got a wonderful lunch buffet. Hopefully they'll open up soon and we can go back to that kind of setting. In the meantime, we do it virtually. So they're pretty experienced. And this is the QR code if you want to register for the storytelling course. Or you can call Rena or email her, and notice there's a 20% discount. If you use that code, you can talk to your HR people. And the course is July 10th. So you've got a little less than a month. And it's the full day course. Covers not only the who I am story, but the teaching and coaching story, the values story, the vision story, and a couple of others. So let me just go into the chats and see what we've got there. Difference between an Easterner and a Westerner in telling a story. That's a fascinating question. Okay, as I mentioned, every civilization has stories, and a lot of them have the same kind of stories. So you've got the creation story, you probably have the guru story, whether it's Chinese or Indian, or if it's something from Star Wars or Lord of the Rings, you're on a quest. So the story templates are the same. The difference, if any, and with globalization, I think now Easterners, Westerners, everybody kind of understands each other, and there's not so much difference, but there's nuance. For example, Easterners probably won't talk about themselves as much. A guy like Donald Trump will never stop talking about himself. It's all me, me, me. And Westerners are more like that, maybe not as extreme as Donald Trump. Whereas Easterners usually are expected to be a little more humble and not talk so much about themselves as their group. So that might be part of it. Part of it could be the length. I think Westerners maybe won't give you as much time, whereas Easterners, either because of politeness or maybe they've got a stronger tradition of storytelling, maybe they're just more open to it, more interested, and willing to give you a little more time. Obviously, the language you use, and that could be a function of seniority. For example, in Japan, it's still very hierarchical in Japan. And when you've got a subordinate talking to a senior, you're going to see differences that you won't see in the US, for example, or even in Singapore. Singapore is a pretty happy medium in between East and West. I think the main thing, in the full course, we talk about what are the 2 qualities you need to be a great storyteller. And those 2 qualities, I'll share it with you now: passion and authenticity. If you're enthusiastic, if you're excited to share your story, people pick up on that. And you need to be authentic. If you're telling a story and it doesn't sound believable, it doesn't sound like you, pretty much anybody will pick up on that and be turned off. So you want to tell a story that's really from your heart. One of the things we talk about in the class is should you use other people's stories? So you've heard a lot of stories in business, like the blind men describing an elephant, or the boy throwing starfish in the sea. I don't really like to use those because a lot of people have heard it before, and then they think that's not very original. Can't you think of anything that's happened to you? And one of the things we emphasize in the course is even if you're just a regular person, everybody's got stories, and the people who know you, the people who work with you, your friends, colleagues, customers, they're interested in hearing about it. Even, for example, now you've got the Kardashian sisters. Everybody is curious about them. I don't know why. You don't know them. You're not going to be in their world. But people are interested in other people. It's just human nature. So people who know you will definitely be interested. Try to find a story that happened to you, and people are interested in that. So that story I told you about Ed and my law practice, I meet people and they tell me years ago, yeah, I remember that story you told me, or you told our class, because the stories are very memorable. So a story about you, not how great you are like Donald Trump would tell. In fact, here's a pointer for, as a leader, telling a story to your team or even to the public. There's a template we also cover called The Hero's Journey. And this is the story of Star Wars, and I think the Chinese journey to the West, and the ancient Greek and Roman Iliad and Odyssey, and Lord of the Ring, and a lot of these big epics are the hero's journey. That's the template. If you're telling a hero's journey story in business, you want your audience to be the hero. You make them the hero and you're just the guide. If you're a boss telling a story about how you're the hero, people are going to be put off by that. So those are some of the differences you might find in the Eastern versus Western aspect of storytelling. Anybody else? Got a little bit of time if people need it. Okay, how to make the audience appear as heroes? Good question. Don't have time to get into too much detail, but I'll give you the big picture of that. So I'm the boss and I'm a leader, and I want people to follow my vision. So if I tell them, look, I know what to do, I know where we're going, I know this is going to work, follow me, I'll take you there, people may not be that excited about it. But if you bring them into it, we've been working hard and we've learned so much and we've struggled together and I know we can overcome this. Let's all work together, and I'm just here to help you guys, okay? In the morning session, when we talked about the high impact manager, one of the things we said is servant leadership. You don't want to be a know-it-all leadership, because everybody knows that nobody knows it all. You want to be a servant that helps people, guides people, brings out the best in people, and let them have the glory. And oddly enough, Donald Trump does both of this. I mean, when he talks, it's mostly about how great he is. But when he talks to his audience at his rallies, the people who love him, he makes them feel like a hero. This guy understands us. He supports us. This is our journey. I mean, I'm not a big fan of Trump, but like most successful business people and politicians, he's a good storyteller. All right, is it addressing them and pulling him to the story? Part of the appeal of a story is it gets people involved. When you watch a movie, you sort of put yourself in the shoes of the main character or the hero, and you want them to succeed, and you feel a certain satisfaction when they do. You invest yourself in them. And that's a natural part of storytelling. In fact, we'll talk in the class about the study of brain waves, and it shows how in a random audience, brain waves are not correlated, but when you're telling a story, they all become in sync. That's something that the story form does. That's why it works so well with children, because they can't follow ideas well, but the story grabs them every time. So the story will naturally pull them in. And using the word we instead of me and you, that also helps. But it's mostly giving them a role. So they're playing a part, they're a character in your story, and they feel like, you know, all of us together, we are the hero. We have a role to play, we've got an impact on the outcome. We're not just along for the ride. Because if people are just along for the ride, they're pretty passive. And that's not what you want. You want them active, you want them invested. So it's crafting a story with a role for them where they get to feel that they're important, they're doing something, they are really the hero. Okay, anybody else? Okay, well, looks like we're about finished here. You've got the information on the screen. If you need it, take a screenshot. If you signed up for it, they'll send you a follow-up email anyway. So I hope I see some of you guys in the full session. It's a great, you know, we don't have a lot of time in this hour, 15 minutes or so to cover much content. But in the full day course, you'll learn a lot. It's a lot of fun. I think most of us love to tell stories. We may not feel confident, but we give you the techniques to help with that. Everybody loves a story, and not everybody feels confident enough to tell it, but that's the goal, to get you guys where you enjoy and feel good about and confident telling stories and getting the results that stories get that data and presentations cannot get. So let me just make a last check of the chats. Okay, just the thank you. All right, so no other questions. In that case, I'll end the meeting. Hope to see some of you guys.
Hello.
All right.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
À, 没办法的哦。
Okay. Thank you guys. Have a good afternoon.